nobody cares about your story. They care about their own story. So what you actually have to do is move from being a storyteller to being a story seller.
Profmed Future Professional. Shared values, one future.
Today's guest needs no introduction. Today I'm speaking with Rich Mulholland virtually, and Rich is one of South Africa's greatest presenters, public speakers. He started out as a roadie for bands such as Iron Maiden and Def Leppard. He worked on the lights deck. He worked all kinds of different hard, rugged, aggressive moving of materials. And then he decided that he actually wanted to start his own thing. He started a presentation business called Missing Link, which has obviously gone through a variety of iterations over the years, most notably since COVID-19 and hard lockdown in particular. Rich has completely pivoted his entire business, and he still manages to elevate his game continuously with the way in which he delivers now virtually around the world, every minute of the day almost. Rich, welcome from Cape Town.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much. Great to be with you. And I would argue that I've maybe not pivoted completely. I think we've just changed the place in which we deliver, but what we do still feels exactly the same.
Well, I'm excited today, Rich, because today we're going to talk about the sales story selling. And you talk specifically about the fact that, I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but there's different ways of delivering that message. And you're going to talk to us specifically about something called the hero's journey. So let's get into it, Rich. Tell us, what are you going to present today?
Yes, I want to answer a question with you. And the question I want to answer for you and for anybody watching is, how do I tell my story in a better way? Because it's something I get asked time and again. And obviously, I'm sure that you do too. The problem is that assumes that people care about your story, and they don't. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share with you for about 10 minutes now. I'm going to share with you just some thoughts and ideas, and then we can kind of discuss it and break that down and maybe try and apply that to how it would work in a sales environment. So the first problem is that people always say to me, again, how do I tell my story? Nobody cares about your story. They care about their own story. So what you actually have to do is move from being a storyteller to being a story seller. What you want to do is you've got to figure out how I can sell my audience a new version of their own story in which I play a better part. So if we can figure that out, then we do well. And that's what I wrote this small little ebook on, this idea that if I could sell you a better version of your story in which I played a role, then we both win. And, Don Packett, my old business partner, he wrote a foreword for the beginning of the book. And it's the worst foreword of all times in that it has the single best line in the whole book in it. I was like, well, that ruins everything. It's literally the best line in the book is in his foreword. And it's this. He says, there are two kinds of stories in sales, yours and those that matter. And that was like that aha moment of that idea is that it's not your story that matters. It's something else. And that's what brings us to this idea of the hero's journey. For those who don't know, the hero's journey is a basically narrative structure that many, many, many films, almost all films and books and things that we've seen, follow. And it's the basic basis of a story that people understand, from Star Wars to Harry Potter to the Hunger Games. They all follow the same narrative. And this was observed by a guy called Joseph Campbell in a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, he said there are many, many, many heroes. They have all different faces, but it's essentially the same hero on the same journey. I don't want to illustrate to you how this works for the point of view, and I want to introduce this hero to you idea with a story from my childhood. And jump in if you recognize what this is from. So, the year is 50 BC. Gaul is entirely occupied by the Romans. Well, not entirely. One small village of indomitable Gaul still holds out against the invaders, and life is not easy for the Roman legionnaires who garrison the fortified camps of Tutorium, Aquarium, Laudanum.
Rich, I got it.
What's it?
It's Asterix and Obelix.
Asterix and Obelix, the adventures of Asterix and Obelix. And this is something that I throw out to audiences all the time. And I'll say to you, when you get it right. And in fact, even online, and people are typing Asterix, the adventures of Asterix, and it comes up. And it doesn't matter which Asterix book you choose. Like, they're all the same. They all have the same narrative structure. There's basically things that happen. It begins with Asterix and Obelix walking somewhere, and it ends with them all sitting in the village having a festival with the bard Cacophonix tied up to a tree. But between that, let's take you to the basic structure. So we're in Gaul now. We've brought you into Gaul, and we're having a nice time. We're Asterix and Obelix. We're just chilling, minding our own business. All of a sudden, the Romans pop by, and we're like, oh no, it's the Romans. Luckily, Asterix is going to have something to say about this. The problem is Asterix is just a wee little guy. Obelix is pretty big, but Asterix is pretty wee, and needs some help in order to beat them. They have an unfair advantage. And that unfair advantage, that secret weapon they have, is a dude called Getafix. And we're going to come to that name in a second. Now, Getafix is creating this magic potion. Asterix goes by, grabs some of the potion. He drinks the potion, goes after the Romans, and bang, end the story. And everybody's happy. And again, they all go back to the village. They sit, they have the festival, they spit some boar, and Cacophonix gets tied to the tree. Now, here's the thing. If you think down the elements of the story, you could forgive yourself for thinking that actually Getafix is the real hero, because Asterix without Getafix wouldn't have made it happen. So if you went and asked Getafix, which again, Getafix, like, how did they come up with that name? If you ask Getafix who the hero is, what would he say? Well, Getafix understands the power of storytelling and would absolutely tell you that Asterix is always the hero. Because, and this is something I say to people in public speaking and presenting all the time, you need to understand, because speakers come to us and say, I just want to tell my story. No, the champion is in the chair. The sage is on the stage. When I'm doing a presentation to somebody, when I'm standing delivering a presentation to an audience, it's not my story that matters. It is theirs, right? All I am relative to their story is I'm just guy on stage. Right? In the movie of their life, I'm just dude who was on stage one day. My job then is not to be the hero, but is to audition for a better part. And that's the fundamental premise of almost any sales story. We go and we present our companies as if they are the hero. This is who we are. This is what we do. We spend all this time selling these ideas, but we forget that actually we've not interrupted their story. And until we do that, nothing happens. So the one thing that we have to consider is that there is another person in the story. And all these stories, every one of these stories, and these stories arcs, has something in common. And that is that they have the hero or the champion, but they have the villain or the baddie. And in our methodology, we refer to this as the dragon. And the idea is that every narrative has a dragon. You've got to decide before you get on stage, what is the dragon that my audience is facing? And one of the mistakes that people make is they think that the audience understands the dragon. And there's two parts to this. Why I like the dragon analogy is that the dragon both represents the threat, but it also represents the opportunity. Because behind the dragon is the loot and the treasure and things like this. And the two big motivations for human beings are fear and greed. So if we can tell a story that includes a version of the fear, the dragon, and a version of the greed, the loot, and we can explain to people what they hope to achieve, what is in front of them. And then if we can put ourselves there as the weapon to try and help them get through that, then we win. When I explain this to people, I'll often say to them that, when sales professionals come up to you and they'll say to you, don't sell features, sell benefits. No, that doesn't matter. If I'm selling an ambulance, if I sell you the features or the benefits of the ambulance, it doesn't matter. You do not want to ride in my ambulance. But if I can sell you the accident, then the ambulance will sell itself. And so that's what we have to figure out. We have to figure out what the dragon is in our story, what the treasure is, and then we got to help our audience beat that. So the elements for me is there is a hero, there is a dragon, there is a weapon, and then there is an action, that call to action. And the kind of one thing that we do, and I think it is job number 2, but it's just not job number 1, is that we think that our primary job is to help our audience slay their dragon. That's kind of true, and that is ultimately true. But what most sales professionals and speakers and presenters fail to understand is it's not job number 1. Job number 1 is to help your audience see their dragon, because most people do not understand that bad thing that's in front of them that you see, and your job is to make sure they see it. If they see the dragon that your company is uniquely positioned to help them slay, you win. We always say to businesses that marketing professionals talk a lot about a USP, a unique selling proposition. I think that's kind of marginally interesting. I think what's more interesting is figuring out what your UPS is. And your UPS is the unique problem that only you can solve. If I can convince you that the problem in your business is one that only being better at public speaking can help you solve. If that's the most important problem that you're facing right now, the most important solution to that problem would be working with us and helping you do that, then I win. And so I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to throw it back to you for any questions or any thoughts now that we've set the premise.
Well, Rich, I think there's two kind of decision tree spaces that I want to go into from there. I think it's a really great construct for people that we're engaging with on this podcast, because there's a lot of brokers as one part of the tree, and then there's a lot of professionals on the other side of that tree. So when you talk about brokers in particular, I think this is such a strong narrative because they finally get to understand what the opportunities are that exist when they're talking to their clients. Like, you don't want to go out and use fearful tactics and just force a fearful message down people's throats. But the reality in the world is there are pros and cons, and there are dragons and there's treasure. So by being able to package those elements within that space, within that story, the brokers then have the ability to position Profmed as the hero within the story that they're telling, right?
Right, absolutely. And to some degree, when the alternative is as bad as it could be, that could really, really kind of rip a family apart if something terrible happens, then it is worthwhile making sure we shine a light on the reality. I think that, yes, we don't want to be purveyors of doom, but we need to be purveyors of reality. And when the reality of there are alternative futures, there is one future in which, X happens and one future in which Y happens. It's very important that we understand that we have both those futures presented ahead of us. And once we do that, then we allow our audience to focus on the one that feels good for them. And we just simply make sure that we're there at the crossroads, helping them find that direction. But I do think it is okay, without being all doom and gloom, to make sure that your audience does understand the reality. And maybe a better way to phrase it is that your audience understands what's at stake. So when we take people through our messaging, and we have a very specific structure we go through for a 30-minute sales meeting, the kind of final thing is the dragon reprise. We want to remind them of the dragon, or by just simply using the or else statement. So we hope you do this, of course, otherwise you may not take advantage of all the great X that is out there in the world. So we want to make sure that we remind them of those things and just keep that as part of their story. And again, when you're saving lives and things, it matters.
Exactly. And I think that you talk about being a purveyor of reality. I think we've all lived a life now where we've seen what the extremes of reality are. We've seen like the various aspects of that spectrum. And I think that it's almost just showing people that here's the soul that exists within the realities of world that we've now been exposed to. What I am interested in moving forward in the next direction with is, where would you start with people constructing their story, their narrative? I think that a lot of times you working with C-suite, you're working with very high-powered and senior individuals, but sometimes they're not necessarily the best public speakers. They're not necessarily the best orators. Sometimes they like to hide behind a teleprompter or deliver a message that has been signed off by multiple people. So where do you start off with someone who may have power or the position in a business, but not necessarily the confidence to deliver a message to a large audience, whether it be public or virtual public?
Well, let's start with the idea of conversational presenting. Bizarrely, I own a presentation company, but 99% of the sales meetings I'm in don't involve me doing a presentation. They involve me having a conversation. And I'm sure that's the same for the vast majority of brokers out there. And in fact, I'm pretty certain it's true for you. There will be times when we have to show up and present, and we have to illustrate and maybe introduce a concept, kind of like I've done today. But then we're going to get into this, which is conversational. And the first thing you have to do is, so here's something I realized a while ago, is that anytime I have a meeting with somebody, they took it for a reason. So we talk about the importance of the dragon hunter question. And the dragon hunter question is the first question after I usually will start a meeting, and I'll sit there and I'll say to them, by the way, I'm getting to the crafting of the message bit, but it's important that your message must be able to go the way your customer needs it to go. So what I'll do is we'll sit down and I'll set the kind of agenda, say, hey, we're going to be together for 30 minutes. I'm going to, just ask you a couple of questions, understand your reality and what's going on right now. Then I'll take you through maybe 5 minutes on our business, 5-10 minutes on how I think we can help you, if that's relevant. Then we're going to flip it over to you, answer any questions you have. And finally, we're going to decide if we're going to do business today. And I always want to plant that seed because I want audiences or my prospects to understand that this is a sales conversation. People will pretend it's not, but both parties know it is. So I say to them, so at the end of this, we're going to decide if we're going to be working together as partners and going forward. Does that sound reasonable to you?
And you're setting that call to action up front. You're saying like there's either a yes or there is a no. And there's some kind of finality at the end of that call.
Right, because there should be, because we're trying to drive towards a condition of victory. And for both parties, the condition of victory for me is that we go on to the next step. The condition of victory for them is that a problem is solved for them, either by you or, the problem is solved knowing not you. So what I then do is I introduce this dragon hunter question, and I don't do it as my first question. I say, so before we get into it though, I'd just love you to answer one particular question, because I know that the last thing anybody needs right now is another Zoom call or another meeting, and we've all got better things to do. So I'm just curious, out of interest, what made you decide to take this meeting? And you ask that question, and you know what happens? People will tell you. They'll say to you, well, the truth is, when I got your email, the fact is, my wife and I have actually been quite worried of late about this, or, and we have been thinking about that in some way. And then all you do is you ask a couple of more questions, making that small dragon in their head, make them sell the doom and gloom story of what that is. And then I chase up with, so if I'm hearing you correctly, if I'm understanding what you've said to me, you're saying that, and then I reposition the story and I retell it using all of their bits in a way that makes sense, that introduces the UPS that I have, the unique problem that only I can solve. And I make sure that I try get that in the right way possible. Too many salespeople sell the category and not them uniquely. So if I was selling the category of, say, presentations, I could go out there and I could walk in and say why presentations are so important and why this matters and why you need to do them better. I've just done a sales pitch for every single one of my competitors. I've sold the category of you need better presentation people, you need better marketing, you need better, whatever the case may be. I've got to sell the part of the problem that separates me from anybody else they might be meeting. And so I get to that point of the question, and then I will introduce the construct of the maybe presentation component. Happy to throw it back from there, and then we can go a bit deeper if you'd like.
Tell me about the world and how it's changed from the death by PowerPoint. You're the antithesis of that kind of thinking. You've done numerous amounts of work and insights into those sorts of spaces. But when it comes to the good old death by PowerPoint, what are your views on slides? I mean, you've been able to incorporate animations and elements now into your Zooms, for example. So where does the C-suite or the salesperson exist in a world now with virtual presentations? What do we use? Do we use conversation? Do we use slides? What do we do?
So the first thing for me is that blaming PowerPoint for a bad presentation is like blaming the pan for a bad meal. Next week, I'm doing a talk in person, and I'm going away from the tool that I was using now, which I'll tell you about in a second, and I'm going back to PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a fantastic tool, badly used, right? It really is just a linear sequencing engine that gets one idea across after the other. And I don't think they need to be fancy. In fact, we're doing less and less and less slide design because it's the least interesting part of the, we've all seen there's 100 services like beautiful.ai or Canva can make beautiful slides very, very quickly for you. You don't need a specialist. The key is that you write a good presentation before you design it, before you deliver it. Your ovation will be earned primarily in your preparation more than your presentation. And it's understanding that there is a structure and a narrative structure that you got to go through to do it. However, that said, I do believe a good slide or good tools and things like this and visual aids can help you get your message across. When presenting online, I use Prezi. So I design using their Prezi Present app, and then I present using their Prezi Video virtual camera system, which is essentially a virtual camera that can play in. And in fact, even just that virtual camera tool can simply just import your PowerPoint slides directly into it immediately, and then it can just show as a picture-in-picture here. The problem is rubbish in, rubbish out. If you take a bad PowerPoint slide deck and you pop it into Prezi and it's showing like this here, and then you bring it full screen and you go down, and it's still terrible with too much text and copy. So this is one of these things that we have to fix the fundamentals. Presenting fancy slides in Prezi isn't going to make your crappy presentation better. It's just going to make it different, delivered in a different way. You have to solve the problem at the core. You need to put a fence at the top of the cliff, not an ambulance down in the valley.
Rich, we know how terrified people are of public speaking as a number one fear in the world. So is there a main tip that you can give our audience into a way to combat those fears? Like, do you recite your presentation to your dogs? Do you speak them to your family? Like, what's a good way to practice and get better at your presence and your delivery thereof, if there's one key nugget that you can leave us with?
There are a number of different ways where it depends on what your particular fear is. if you, generally speaking, the people aren't scared of presenting. I'm not even afraid of their content. What they're afraid of is looking silly in front of lots and lots of people. The primary way to combat that is to be so confident in the information you're delivering, and importantly, confident that you're going to make a positive impact on the audience. If I fundamentally believe that the end of me delivering a presentation and some material to people can actually make those people better, and I wholeheartedly believe this, well, then I'm going to be a lot more confident when delivering that message. So the number one thing you got to look at and ask yourself is, do I believe wholeheartedly in the material that I'm about to deliver? And then you just got to constantly go through and make sure you're comfortable in delivering it, and make sure that is the work that I've done here the best work that I could put forward to present today. As a rule of thumb, I always say to people, look at a slide and say, is there anything left I could take away to make the message clearer? Not, is there anything else I can add? And then remove things until you've got only the bare bones of the message that you want to get across. And when you have that, then you will feel more comfortable because you know that the preparation work was done well. If you just stand up the night before and write a document, and what we refer to as a docu-deck, that's a series of lines put on it's like a Word file that fell sideways, right? If you're presenting doing that, well then, you're just going to be reading something through and no preparation is required on your side. And that's why you're going to stand up there and appear nervous. One last little thing is it's a sport you can only practice in public. If you have a big presentation 6 weeks from now, present every week some different topic leading up to that. You'll get more and more comfortable the more you do it.
And I think it's about your point there is about making it about the audience, not about yourself. Like once you can get rid of that kind of ego aspect, that's when you're onto the right track. Rich, it's been absolutely incredible. I think the best thing for the audience is being able to follow you on social media, to be able to see your tidbits of information that you share on a daily basis. So how does everybody find you online? What are your handles? What are your links?
You're very welcome to go to getrich.af. If you go there, you'll find links to everything. If you go getrich.af/link farm, you'll find a link farm to everything from my YouTube channel to my email newsletter to everything built up from there. And I would love to see you. LinkedIn is probably the place that I'm most active. It's definitely my favorite of the social networks for now.
Rich Mulholland, it's been an absolute pleasure. Book him for your talks, get him online. He's got fancy Zoom skills and he's a most incredible speaker, one of the best there is in the country, the continent, maybe even the world. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rich. Have an awesome rest of your week.
And you too. Thank you for having me.
Profmed Future Professional. Shared values, one future.